This is the Hope Not Nope podcast,
where we answer your questions and share inspirational stories to fill your soul with hope.
Our mission is to empower hope to those who have been plagued by nope.
I'm Dr. Dylan Caswell.
And I'm Brandy.
And we're here to bring you out of the nope and into hope.
Welcome back to the next episode of the Hope Not Nope podcast. We are so excited to be here with you. Recently, we had one of, in my opinion, top 10 coolest moments of my entire life. And you're probably thinking, oh, I bet you got to see the solar eclipse in totality. And we did, although there were clouds, but that's actually not one of the top 10 coolest moments of my life. Dylan, tell them what I think is really the top 10 coolest moments of my life.
Boom, eclipsed.
No,
one of the top 10 moments was really cool. It happened about a week ago, but we actually got to see our book, Hope Not Nope, on a billboard. Not just on a billboard, but on a billboard in Times Square, where we know that there's about 100,000 people that go through there day in and day out. What was really cool is that it was like a rainy, monsoony day, and we could have taken that as this plate of nope. But instead we were like, man, what an advantage to have gray skies and to have these storms happening, because the billboard was bright and it was yellow orange background that looked like the sun, and then the light blue of the Hope Not Nope, it captured the entire square. It was so cool to see, like, just the placement of it was right near the Father Duffy Monument, and then it was right above the Pele soccer store. So talk about like lifelong athlete and finding hope, and just the line up of these things was awesome. And we also learned that if you stand there long enough looking up at a billboard, the other people around you will start to look at it as well.
Exactly. It was awesome. I mean, there's no lie. It was a monsoon. We should have looked at the stats, but I wonder if it was the rainiest day that New York City has had the entire year. Like, it was crazy, pouring down rain, hard rain, nearly the entire day. We were just standing there with our two umbrellas, looking at the billboard whenever it would come across the screen. And it truly was such a cool experience. And you know, our hope around that is that the people who saw the billboard needed hope that day. And I think, especially in the midst of the hustle and bustle of New York City, in the midst of the weather, the crazy weather that has been, specifically in like March and April, of like really nice and then snow and then rain and all the things, like having this billboard be so bright and electric and about hope. Like, I don't mean to be biased, but there were so many billboards about, oh, buy this product, listen to this song, watch this new movie, whatever. And we even saw some book promotions on different billboards in Times Square as well, but none of them seemed like it was really about hope. None of them really seemed like it was about bettering yourself and becoming the person that you're intended to be. And so for me, it was just such a moment of surrealness and awe of like, this billboard in this book and this message means so much more, and what a gift it was to at least be in front of nearly 330,000 people that day. And of course, like, we have social media and stuff where it could potentially reach even more and maybe into the millions someday, but it was such a cool moment. And it was only a month after, 1 year of celebrating the book too. So it was just so cool. Definitely top 10 moments of my life. So that's why it's my/our hope story. Anything else from the trip that you want to share about that was a hope story for you?
In particular to the billboard, I mean, it was just so unreal to see that, of just like how hilarious it is that it was like in Times Square. And notoriously, if you know me, I struggle with New York City because of how busy it is. I struggle with it because the people that are the heroes aren't getting the credit that they deserve. Like, everyone's looking for stars, and we saw so many people out in the storm sweeping up garbage, and they're like, the dustpan being just full of water. And I was just like, man, what a world it would be if we would run to these people and go, can we get a picture with you for the work that you're doing? Like, they're just so underappreciated. It's so busy. There's so much main character syndrome. There's so much just like, I need to be to this point, get out of my way, I'm going to run into you to get to that point. The subway system confuses me. I just, as far as big cities go, I struggle in New York City. And the fact that the first like huge promotion was in the busiest part of the biggest city that we have in the States was just kind of like hysterical to bring me to that point. But then to shift my own perspective and my own biases from being in there. So it was one of the better trips that I've had to the city. But I will say it's so surreal. Like it's still soaking in that something like this could happen. You know, coming from a small town, coming from a school that doesn't have a lot of money, coming from a background of dyslexia and grammar issues, to seeing a book that you wrote on a billboard in Times Square, it doesn't seem real. And to me, it was that first taste of like when you put in all this work, and then the achievement, part of the achievement is reached because we're just getting started. Like we're just getting started with this, but like seeing that, it doesn't set in, it doesn't sink in. It's like, wow, this is incredible, but it fires you up of like, okay, what's the next step? Like, what's that next championship that we're going to win? And a few days after that, we did see that the book was ranked #1 on Amazon for a few days, and it's been kind of bouncing in and out of there. And I was like, man, the next step is that this stays at #1, not from a point of it just like being #1, but because that's an objective measure that we have, that it's the message of hope is reaching people, that it's getting to the volumes that we want it to get to when the time is right. So it was just amazing. And then we got to go see the Rangers play. And I was telling Brandy the NHL's kind of decreased fighting. 2 seconds into puck drop, 5-on-5 brawl, 8 player ejections, 2 players in the penalty, an absolutely wild game.
It was awesome.
And then a player that we know through a friend ended up being the star of the game at the end of it, and the Rangers won. So it was just like an incredible experience, an awesome celebration. Like I said, it's still soaking in. Like it still hasn't really settled in of like, wow, like this accomplishment that happened, because my brain just goes to like, awesome, this is a step. There's so many more steps to go.
Yeah, you have the natural inclination to be like, yes, let's celebrate for like 5 seconds, but like there's so much more to do. There's so much work that can be done, and I think that it's a gift to be able to sit and dwell in it for a little bit. And so I'm grateful that we're able to talk about it on the podcast, because it allows us to, you know, we had times where we talked about it, we journal about it and things like that, but this allows us to dwell in it just a little bit more. And the trip to New York City, when we found out that this was happening, I was like, haha, you get to go to New York City, because I just figured I would never go to New York City with you in our lifetime. But it was awesome because I have probably, 5 to 10 friends that live in North Jersey and New York City, and my mentor lives down there. And although Dylan got to meet her at our wedding, it wasn't, everyone wants their spouse to like know their mentor truly one-on-one. And so it was really cool because the day after the Billboard, we got to spend time with her and have lunch with her. And she was my mentor before I even met Dylan. And so what a cool experience that she's journeyed with me the past 3-4 years. And she's also an author and a writer and a columnist. And so it was just cool to see these writers like interacting, and like 2 people I love so much. So the whole trip to New York City was just absolutely amazing. Although it would have been nice without the rain, I think the rain was intended, and I don't think it could have gone better.
Last thing I'll add into this, and we'll hop into those questions, is that we both had a moment during the national anthem of the Rangers game. Like Madison Square Garden is just so historic that we were like, yeah, we're going to go to a game. We haven't been to a Rangers game. And one of our clients is a huge Rangers fan, to the point that he brought 2 of his jerseys for us to wear to make sure that we fit in at the Garden for this game. So walking around the Garden is so historic. But the coolest thing was during the national anthem, I've never seen more pride of a city and of a country than what we saw in these New Yorkers. And we say that like we're in upstate New York, and these are like the city, like the New Yorkers that you would think about. During the national anthem, typically it's quiet, like people will cheer up. But during the national anthem at the Garden, they're showing images of New York City. They're showing the American flag, and the fans are screaming their heads off in just pure cheer for how much they love the city, how much they love the country, and how much they love the national anthem. It brought us to tears. It moved us in such a special way of just like, wow, like I've just never heard the national anthem received in that way.
Well, that's the key. It's the way that it was received. I've heard amazing national anthems before. Like I
Mm-hmm.
think of Chris Stapleton's national anthem is like one of the best of all time in regards to like the quality of music being
Mm-hmm.
sung, but to to be in an environment where it's received in the way that it was received, I didn't know that like city people were as patriotic as that. Like
Right.
I don't mean that to sound like naive or judgmental, but like we both grew up in the country and
Yeah.
like people are patriotic there for sure. But it was so refreshing, and like I have tears in my eyes now thinking about how beautiful it was, because especially at this time of year, going into like elections and things like that, you just hear all this like hate and all this like struggle and just all this junk. And like I'm not we're not this is not a time for politics by any means, but like in the midst of all that chaos, to see a city become so patriotic was just it was it was so beautiful. I don't even know
Yeah.
like what more to say. It was so beautiful, and it gave me hope for the entire country of like, you know, America does not suck as bad as people want to say it
Yeah.
does.
Yeah.
That's all I'm saying.
Yeah. It's just a moment of coming together. And for me, changing my perspective of all New Yorkers have main character syndrome to, well, they can't only possess main character syndrome if they're all coming together to cheer on not just the city, but this entire country. So to me, it was such a cool perspective shift. I think my relationship from I never want to visit New York City has gone to I'm okay with going to the city, which is a huge shift.
Yeah. So maybe we'll be in New York City again sometime.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right, let's dive into questions, because I think we honestly could talk about that trip and just the hope moments throughout the whole trip, probably for an entire episode, but we'll dive into the questions anyways.
Perfect.
So, our first question is from a listener named Jan, and she asks, how do you decipher between injury and soreness?
That's a great question. I think it's a question that as lifelong athletes, we're constantly asking, because it leads into the question of when should I push? When should I listen to my body? When do I go, you know what, body? No, I know you're saying that I can't go anymore, but we're going to go ahead and go anymore. So, what's the difference between injury and discomfort? Discomfort, you can continue to work through, where injury is going to prevent you from being able to work through that. I think of an injury as something that sidelines you, that you can't push through that. Example of this is a rugby player that fractures their tibia, and it's an open fracture. There's discomfort, but there's an injury, and that injury is going to prevent them from being able to perform in any aspect of that sport. So an injury is going to put you on the sideline. Discomfort is something that you're able to work through, and then there's different levels of discomfort. There's the discomfort of lactic acid, which is one of the more discomforting feelings that you can have. There's the discomfort of mental fortitude, of that battle that you have within yourself of, can I keep pushing at this level? Is this pace sustainable? That brings on a level of discomfort inside yourself, trying to figure that out. And then there's a level of discomfort of potentially dealing with something like a tendon injury and trying to figure out how much do I actually push into it. And if I push into it too far, then it does become an injury because it's going to sideline me. So hopefully that answers that question. Anything that you would add in, because this is an area as an athlete that you've worked through.
Yeah, and I think I'm still working through it and trying to figure it out, because not that I'm new to CrossFit, but if you look at from 0 to 18, we hardly lifted weights ever. Where now I'm like lifting weights on a regular basis, like 10 years down the road and stuff. So I think I'm still trying to figure out, is this injury or is this soreness? I think one of the big things that like when I think of injury, I think of, yes, being sidelined, but then I think of like you're out for 2 weeks, 4 weeks, 6 weeks, whatever it may be.
Mm-hmm.
So I can look back and say, in this past year, I had that like ankle sprain that like really did kind of take me out for a couple weeks, and that was unfortunate. But even this past week, like we did a lot of overhead shoulder movement, and my shoulder is really sore, but I'm still able to like do the work. I might have to take it a little easy, but I'm not sidelined to the point of like not being able to like lift overhead at all.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think like there is every person is going to experience injury and soreness differently, and I love the different like the differentials that you
Mm-hmm.
that you used of like, is there mental fortitude, is it lactic acid, and all of that. But I think there's a level of asking yourself the question of soreness equals discomfort equals pain, whatever. But does that mean that I have to like sit out and stop enjoying like what I'm doing? I think that there's definitely been times in my life where I've had discomfort and I've said that it was an injury,
Mm-hmm.
and I did that because of fear. I was afraid that it was an injury, and so it like laid me out for a little bit, took me out of like the sport for a little bit. Where now I'm like, nah, I really can push through, and the push through, I think this is what it comes down to. Sorry, I'm like extroverting all my thoughts. But I think one thing it comes down to is like, is the push through creating more discomfort into injury
Mm-hmm.
versus like, is the push through, you know, yes, if you're working out, you're going to be sore, you're going to have discomfort, but you can still push through and be fine, or is it creating injury long term? Does that make
Yeah.
sense?
Yeah. And let's tackle another thing that's thrown out there. No pain, no gain
Yeah.
on the back of every t-shirt in the 90s for the long time, other than the N1 mixtape ones that had like trash talk on them, but we won't go down that lane because we could be there for a while. But shout out to my N1 fans that are still watching the professor videos and hot sauce and skip to my Lou. But anyway,
The 90s.
the 90s, no pain, no gain. Maybe it was the 2000s, 90 to 2000, somewhere in that
Regardless.
range. If you know, you know. No pain, no gain. Where does that come from? That does not come from injury. That does not come from a rehabilitation protocol. That comes from a strength training, performance based protocol. No pain, no gain references when you get to lactic threshold, it is very painful. It is very hard to keep on moving. It's very uncomfortable. But that's where the biggest gains can be made for particular types of sports. So no pain, no gain comes down to, can you take the pain of fatigue, the pain of lactic acid, but continue to push into that, knowing that it's going to help your performance in the long term. It does not come from, I have an injury, my knee's swelling up, I'm not able to contract these muscles, there's redness, there's signs of a true injury. That's where no pain, no gain makes absolutely no sense. Like in that, if you keep trying to push through that, you're just going to set yourself back further and further and further and further. And a quick example I can give of this is an athlete that initially tears their ACL. Do they need surgery right away? No. Do they need surgery long term? There's a lot of evidence showing that they may not. But in those early phases when there's swelling, there's instability, probably not a good time to be working on cutting and power based movements, because now what ends up happening is that knee's loose, one because of ligament, two because the muscles aren't firing around it, three the nervous system isn't trusting it. So now if we have this person doing this and we're going no pain no gain, well, now we're setting them up for meniscal injury. That can set them back further because now there's more swelling in the knee, which means there's more inhibition, meaning that there's less likelihood that the brain's going to say contract these muscles around it. So that's an instance in like, no pain, no gain makes absolutely no sense in that scenario. So the thing I always tell people, how do you know it's an injury versus how do you know that it's just discomfort? Well, if there's an injury, there's going to be signs of injury. There's going to be swelling. There's going to be inhibition of different muscle groups that are happening. There's going to be a lack of function that's happening that, for example, like your shoulder had discomfort in it. We modified it and you're able to keep moving. If there's a big injury in there, there's going to be swelling in that area. Muscles are going to be inhibited, which then makes it very, very, very difficult to try to lift and do that movement. So with injury, there's other signs associated with it. So hopefully that clears up the no pain, no gain t-shirt sayings that are commonly out there. And I mean, we could dive into that on a whole other episode of
Yeah.
what that really means and how to use that.
Right. Well, thank you.
Yeah.
Our second question is from a listener named Scott, and he asks, what causes scoliosis and can it be prevented?
My first thought goes to, not that Scotty doesn't know this, but the song Scotty Doesn't Know, and that it's Scott and scoliosis. So there's a lot of parallels there. Scoliosis, I think the first thing that we should say is that scoliosis is not a death sentence to your athletic career. Scoliosis is not a death sentence to you claiming health. Usain Bolt has scoliosis. And there's a lot of other elite athletes, like elite as in the top 0.001% of athletes, that have some degree of scoliosis. The other question you may be asking, because I got ahead of myself, is what is scoliosis? Well, scoliosis is just a curvature of the spine. It can be in any part of the spine, but it tends to be in the lower lumbar or in the mid-back, the thoracic spine. And it's a curve that kind of moves laterally, that takes the straight spine and kind of shifts it to one side. So there's one side that's shifted over, one side that's kind of like a C shape, and the other side that's kind of like a cave coming in. There's different degrees of scoliosis. Scoliosis can happen developmentally, but most of the time it happens idiopathically, which means we don't know the cause. We don't really know what brings it on. If it's developmentally, then we start looking at, well, what's the severity of the curve? And people will look at the Cobb angle. And from the Cobb angle, they can decide, well, how much intervention is actually needed for this scoliosis. But oftentimes it's not for function, it's for cosmetic reasons, which I get. Like as a teenager, you don't want to be super shifted over because kids can be mean and you don't want to be ridiculed. So you want to have the surgery to have a fusion, which brings your spine back into a normal alignment. But again, it all depends on how much of a curve that there is. Most curves that we tend to see are more not structurally based in the sense that like the spine grew in that way, but more of a result of function, more as of a result of muscles protecting and guarding. For example, if you have a discomfort on one side of your body and the quadratus lumborum and these other strong muscles that go along the spine, they get the message to protect, and they're protecting down to that one side. They can raise your hip up higher, which then shifts your rib cage over, which then makes it look like there's a scoliosis. Then we can get worried that, oh my gosh, my spine's growing in this curve, when the reality is that the muscles are protecting. So if we get rid of the message that's saying protect, well, the spine can go back to its straighter alignment. So that's a crash course on scoliosis. I don't even know if I answered the question. What was the question to begin with?
The question was, what causes it and can it be prevented?
Okay. Yeah. So I think we hit on it with those. Can it be prevented? It's hard to say that it can be prevented because we don't really know the cause of it. There might be theories of like prolonged posture. If I sit like this for a prolonged period of times, that my tissues are going to go into that. Again, that's just a theory. I don't know any of the evidence on that, but it's hard to prevent something if we don't really know what's bringing it on. Can we reverse it if it's happening and it's happening as a result of the things that we talked about, like these protective factors and muscle length? Yes. Can it be treated if it's more structural, that the spine is actually growing in that way? Yes. Can it be treated conservatively, meaning without surgery? Potentially. It depends on how much of an angle is happening. If it is a severe angle and it needs to be corrected, then it would be surgical intervention.
Yeah, I think my biggest takeaway from everything you said, yes, the causing and the prevention, but also just the reality that you can still be a lifelong athlete with scoliosis. I've had friends tell me like, "Oh, I have scoliosis, so I can't do this movement." And like I just want them to know like, yes, you can. At least in their, cuz I know for them it's not severe enough where it's like whatever. I think that they were told like, "Oh, be careful, be careful, be careful." So it has become more of a fear thing as opposed to like empowered of like, yeah, you have this thing, but like you can still be an athlete, you can still move. Don't be afraid to do these certain movements with your back because of it. So I think my biggest takeaway is like, still be an athlete. You got this.
Yeah, and to high levels, right? Like Usain Bolt, granted he has like a mild scoliosis, but let's remember that he competed in a sport that is all about efficiency. And it's all about getting force to the ground and having vertical force vectors that allow you to then go horizontal in top speed phases. So having a curve automatically makes that harder for you to get these straight line forces to propel yourself. Yeah, he's the fastest man in the world.
Yes, Usain Bolt, for crying out loud.
And he eats chicken nuggies. So we want to get into diet and scoliosis and these things that we've been taught that are preventing us from doing this. Like that would be a long conversation. But anyway, you can have a scoliosis, and depending on and with that, there's even athletes, I don't know the names off the top of my head, but that have a significant scoliosis, like one that's visible to the eye, and they're powerlifting, setting deadlift records, and it doesn't become an advantage by any means by having the scoliosis or having this curve, but it's so cool to see that these people have been able to push through it and say, hey, I have this label of scoliosis, but it's not going to define my performance outcome. I can take care of other factors and still reach incredibly high levels.
Perfect. I love it.
Yeah.
Awesome. Our third question is from a listener named Liam, and he asks, I've been seeing more videos on TikTok and Instagram about knees over toes and isolating the VMO. What's your take on that? Dylan loves talking about the VMO.
My take on it is anytime we watch a video on Instagram or TikTok, we have to ask for more context. We need to get more information from it. But I'm going to answer this very simply, and then I'm going to dive deeper into it. And Brandy, you're allowed to cut me off and say, just stop. Like you're going too far into it. If you're listening in the car, I'm sorry, you're stuck with the answer that we're going to give. Just kidding. You can turn it off or turn it down. But let's start with the VMO. What is the VMO? It's part of the quad, right? The quad is the four-headed monster muscle on the top part of your thigh. It's broken into 4 different groups. The VMO is one of these groups that's thought to be on the inside part of your knee. If you've seen people with jacked quads, it's kind of like the teardrop on the inside part of the thigh. That's the VMO. So the argument's made that 1, we need to isolate the VMO. 2, that by isolating the VMO, we can decrease knee pain and help with patellar tracking. And then 3, if we isolate the VMO, our sports performance will increase, will jump higher. And that by doing a knees over toe movement, we're able to isolate the VMO further. That's the common theory that's out there, to the point that my nephew, who I think is very well educated for his age with training and with sports, because I've been programming for him for a bit now, but messaged me one day and asked, like, hey, should I be isolating my VMO? No, because you can't. You cannot isolate your VMO. A mentor that I look up to in the field, Eric Maida, who you may call Eric Mara, but it's actually Eric Maida, wrote this awesome blog article on it. And it was titled, Can You Isolate the VMO? And I'm going to tell you the entire blog article in less than 2 seconds. Ready? No. That was the whole blog. That was the entire article.
Not 10,000 words.
Not 10,000 words. 1 word. No. You can't do it. You can't do it. So then let's dive into, or let me ask, is it okay if I dive into
go for
why
it.
we
got time.
can't isolate the VMO? Because it's such a big topic, because I don't want people wasting their time with these cheesy exercises trying to isolate something that they can't isolate, when they could be using that time to be precise with a movement that's actually going to move the needle forward to get them towards their performance goals. So that's why I get passionate about it.
For sure.
It's not just like being in a dogmatic camp, like one side versus the other side, but I'm just so fatigued of seeing people wasting time on junk. That like we want to give them the nutrient dense movements, the nutrient dense material. To isolate the VMO, it needs to have its own nerve. And it's innervated by the femoral nerve, which also innervates the vastus medialis, which also innervates the rectus femoris, which also activates the vastus lateralis, which are all the muscles of the quads. The VMO does not have an independent branch that goes to it. In order for it to be isolated, it needs to have its own branch that is going to it that allows it to activate on its own. The reason that the VMO got so hyped up was because back in the 90s, when people had patellofemoral pain, back to the 90s, we're back in there again. When people had patellofemoral pain, so when they had kneecap pain, they did research on people that had the pain, and they found that the timing of the muscle activation from the medial quad to the outside, the lateral part of the quad, that the VMO timing and the vastus medialis timing were off. It was delayed. So then it was thought that if we can activate this medial component of the quad, that it will track the kneecap better. And if it tracks it better on the train track, then people won't have pain. And that was the common thought for a while. So we're doing quad squeezes with the feet and angled out and external rotation to get the VMO. We're doing these movements, moving the feet to get the VMO. But then what ended up happening is researchers looked at people that don't have knee pain, and they found that, wow, the same thing is happening in people that don't have knee pain. So maybe this is just something that happens in every population. So then that started to change it a little bit of like, okay, maybe we don't need to try to preferentially activate the VMO. But then from that, the question came up, can we even preferentially activate the VMO? And it's funny because anatomists, they argue if the VMO even exists or if it's just a continuation of the vastus medialis. So we're sitting here arguing, can you isolate it? Where anatomists are going, does this muscle even exist or is it just part of the other muscle? It cannot be isolated. When you contract the quad, all four heads of the quad contract. And that's what we need to focus on. Now, people that are claiming that they isolated their VMO and it got bigger, because we see it in bodybuilders, we see it in functional fitness athletes, we see it in people doing knees over toe movement. The knees over toe movement doesn't create more VMO activation, it creates more quad activation as a whole. The stronger that your quad becomes, the more that all parts of your quad, but the VMO itself, is going to show. So we can't just look at someone that has a jacked quad and go, oh, their VMO is jacked because they did VMO specific exercises. Their VMO is jacked because their quad is jacked, and their quad is jacked because they did exercises that were of a threshold that created more of a stimulus to create that muscle bulk. Lunges, squats, quad extensions, all these things that are actually just moving the quad with load, bring that on. And the stronger your quads are, the healthier that your knees are going to be. So does that answer it? Did I hit each part of it?
Yeah,
okay. All right.
Great
Perfect.
job. Liam, we hope that helps you, and remember the takeaway that, you know, whenever you see something on TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, social media, whatever, like take it, but then keep learning. Don't just believe something from a 15-second video, but really keep learning, keep diving in, because there's a lot of information out there, and you know, our goal, our desire is to give you the best that we can provide, but there's going to be times that we fall short, but there's also times that other people really fall short because they don't have updated research and information. And so just always take that next step to keep learning.
A common question I always ask when I see these things, especially on social media, is where does this come from? Where does this thought originate from? Because we learned in Mass a few weeks ago that 75% of the information that we get is information that's been passed down by word of mouth, by people talking about it. So when we go back and we start looking at these things of like knees over toe and VMO and how it's related to knee pain, how it's related to performance, and we find out where it actually comes from, its origin story, then we realize that what people are saying now, there's really no fruit in it because it's coming off of a theory that's now been disproved.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. Well, we hope that you enjoyed this episode of the Hope Not Know podcast. Jan, Scott, and Liam, thank you so much for your questions. We love answering them. So if you are listening and you have a question for us, head over to hopenotnope.org, head over to Instagram at hopenotnope, ask us questions, and we'll be sure to feature it on future episodes. And thank you also for listening and hearing about our awesome trip to New York City and Times Square with the Billboard for the book. It was a great time. We appreciate it, and we look forward to seeing you and talking with you and interacting with you on all of our social media, but also in our next episode of the Hope Not Know podcast.
shout out to the Hope community. We had a friend that on her lunch break got on the subway, made it to the Billboard, got a picture with it that we got to have breakfast with the next day. So that was the support, and meeting your mentor was incredible. And then all the people that were there with us virtually, that were following the story and reposting the content and just celebrating with us, because that's what makes it so special, is that moment of looking at it and going, wow, we did this. Yeah. At no point did the thought come into my brain, I did this. I wrote this book. I got this on the Billboard. But the entire time it was, we did this. Back to my parents, back to coaches, back to everyone that has helped shape us and form us, that it's a team effort. And when we can celebrate that as a team, that's what's so special. Like the text messages coming in from people. I remember when you were just coaching and a little twerp at the gym. I remember this moment. Like man, it's so cool to see that this has happened. So it's cool to celebrate as a team. So let's keep supporting each other in this, because that's what makes it special. And have a great week. And remember, every day is not just a day to be hopeful, but it's an opportunity to become hope. Ka-chow!